Speaksies.
For the first time in a long time, I actually traveled somewhere.
Okay.
I left my home, I left the city, and I went somewhere and stayed for a couple days, which, if someone is time traveling and hearing this, like, wow, what nuclear wasteland do you live in? But in the time of the vid, not too much traveling. So I felt safe enough to do it. It was a short weekend jaunt with the kid. My wife had some training she was doing, so the kid and I just went on a little road trip down the road, not too far away.
Okay.
It was one of those things that, when you're at a hotel, you wear a mask in the common areas, and then apparently you're safe as soon as you get in your room.
I know.
Like how someone had likened it recently when you do that at a restaurant. I deal with that a lot. I go in to pick up an order as there's people eating in another part of the room. And someone had used the analogy of it's like having a pool with a peeing section in it. But I digress. So a couple things that I've noticed as traveling, regardless of the vid or whatever, I don't like hotels as much as I did when I was younger.
I agree.
When I was younger, hotels were an adventure. It was wild. You felt like you were some sort of, I don't know, man of the world, child of the world doing things. And now I just can think of all the other gross people that have probably been in this room and what they've done. Yeah. And there's no way it's been cleaned enough for my personal satisfaction.
Things you don't think about as much when you're a kid.
Yeah, but I think of all the fluids and activities and other gross things that have happened in that.
Fluids like somebody spilled some Sunny D or...
Yeah, Sunny D. That's one way to put it. There's definitely some Sunny D that's been in there.
Definitely some D of some sort. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's weird that you do come to a point where, as an adult, where all of a sudden hotels are just gross. And I think it coincides with that 2020 Undercover they did a few years ago. I don't know if you happen to see that, where they basically had hidden cameras and saw how disgusting and how they were reusing plastic cups and all that stuff. I can't get that out of my head either.
No, it's confirmed everything that I've always, or actually I probably always known, but it didn't bother me.
No.
In the same way that I think I've mentioned before, I'm amazed at any of us, if anyone's worked at a restaurant, that anyone goes out to eat anywhere.
I know.
But we still do. So speaking of food, one thing I also noticed on my travel that was, in the end, not a surprise, but the moment was, so the place that I was staying had a Dairy Queen next door to it. And my daughter and I kind of looked at each other, and she knows I'm going to get a cheeseburger wherever we go. I know she's going to get chicken strips. So we're both like, let's just hit Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
So I order cheeseburger meal. She orders a chicken strip meal. And the gentleman behind the counter then says $24.95.
Whoa. To
which I recoiled and, actually probably became as close to indignant. I know my voice went up several octaves, I have a feeling. And he very nicely explained, we're at a tourist spot. We charge more for everything. I rescinded my payment. He understood. Apparently it wasn't the first time. And we went somewhere else. But, so traveling, it was nice to get out of the house. It was nice to get away. Did it make me really miss traveling and going places? I actually got to give credit to Dairy Queen because they actually helped me realize that staying at home all the time maybe isn't the worst thing.
All right. Well, welcome to Origin of Speaksies. My name is Scott. I'm here along with my good friend Steve, man of the world, traveling man. And tonight we're going to talk about something that is not usually fun to talk about. We're going to try to make it fun. We're going to talk about death.
And I think this actually will be fun. You and I talked leading up to the show.
Yes.
And you always do a very good job of running stuff past me in case I'm going to clinch up or have a tight lip the entire time that we're speaking. And generally it's things that get into racial terms. But for some reason, I'm really looking forward to talking about death.
Well, good. I'm so glad because most people don't want to talk about death. I had a death in the family, actually this week. My grandmother, passed away, and I said passed away. You don't want to say died. There's something, my dad called to tell me and he said, your grandmother died just like that. It was and I was almost taken aback that he just said it that, without a euphemism because we're so used to hearing it that way. But when you think about it, we're all going to die. It doesn't make it easier when somebody does die. You miss them no matter how long they're here. But let's get into this. So most experts believe that humans are the only animals aware of their own mortality. which is interesting. How does that affect us? We know that we're going to die. And who knows? But I started doing some research on this because I was curious, because I was going to say that, is that true? And I kind of went down a rabbit hole, and I ended up in an article called "Did a Female Burro Commit Suicide?" in Psychology Today. And that got actually it was very sad. Spoiler alert, probably.
Wow.
And see, this is where I said, we're going to talk about death. I won't let it get too dark. So I'm not going to tell the story of the female burro committing suicide, but apparently it's a pretty hot topic. I found multiple articles about can animals commit suicide, which I really didn't intend to get into. But it all goes back to, do animals realize they're going to die? And the consensus is like, no, they don't.
Except for donkeys, apparently.
Yeah, it is. They have some sort of instinct but even then, do they really know they're going to die? But it takes me to the point that I really wanted to make, which is we don't like to talk about death.
Right.
Most of us would like to ignore the idea that we're going to die. And why is that? And I think most of us are kind of like Bob Wiley in What About Bob? One of my favorite movies, and favorite Bill Murray movies, but just probably favorite movies. And one of my favorite scenes in that movie is, so if you haven't seen it, which shame on you if you haven't, but one of the things is Bob Wiley is afraid of everything, but he's afraid of death. He's afraid of dying. That's one of the biggest parts of things in the movie. Well, he ends up bunking in the kids' room, Sigmund, and there's a scene that is one of my favorite scenes of any movie, where Sigmund says, "Bob, are you afraid of death?" And then it just shows Bill Murray's face as Bob Wiley. Yeah. And just the look on his face is just the classic Bill Murray look. And he says, and then Sigmund, of course, Bob says yes. And then Sigmund says, "I'm going to die. You are going to die." Anyway, here's a little bit of that scene.
And there's no way out of it. You're going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. And what difference does it make if it's tomorrow or in 80 years? Much sooner in your case. Do you know how fast time goes? I was 6, like yesterday.
Me too.
I'm going to die. You are going to die.
So, it just illustrates we're all like Bob Wiley a little bit there, where we don't want to talk about it.
Right.
So I was thinking about, why don't we like to talk about death? And I guess there's some obvious things. For example, the fear of the unknown.
Right.
Or we just don't like the idea of thinking of ourselves dying. And, again, the fear of the unknown, but also just like the pain maybe that might come with it. But then there are other things I hadn't thought of. So this is I was on a website called hospicefoundation.com.
Wow.
Yeah. And they talk about what are reasons that people don't want to talk about death. And some things I hadn't thought about, like, we're conditioned to do everything to live and not die.
Right.
So if you really think about it, everything, when you're trying to lose weight, when I want to quit smoking, things we need to get more exercise, live in a house, everything we do.
Realize you shouldn't hang out with burros that much because they're just going to bring you down.
A female burro committed suicide. Oh, yeah. Yeah, don't hang out with burros. Most people, now, of course, you got your ex-gamers and people like that are doing things that are evil Knievel,
Right.
But most of us, even them, they're doing things, but they're taking efforts to not die. So we're just our whole nature is to stay alive. Even just the thought of death is antithetical to like our mission, which is to stay alive as an animal, if you will, or just as a human being. The other thing is, sometimes people think they're not prepared for it. So it's just like, if you're putting off thinking about doing certain things or whatever, because you're like, gosh, I don't have enough insurance, or I don't have my affairs in order. So you just kind of want to will yourself to live. So talking about death, it's almost like jinxing it or something.
Yeah. I've experienced that myself. I remember the last time I needed to adjust my will, which in case anyone's listening, the Glissman estate is not that complicated, but it was a simple fact of having to do that seemed to almost acknowledge
Yes.
what would happen. And I often think of what happened to Prince when Prince passed away, that his estate was a mess because he pretty much didn't want to think about the fact that he could pass away. You know, the best way I can empathize with dealing with it by not addressing it at all. If you don't pretend the monster's in the room, or maybe it's almost like when you're a kid, you pull the blankets above your head. If I can't see it, if I don't acknowledge it, maybe it's not going to get me.
You know, that really is true. And it's like, you know, putting your head in the sand kind of too. It's not going to happen. I've been rewatching Breaking Bad, and there is a scene where Walter White is in doing his cancer treatment, and there's this other guy in there, and the guy's just kind of like real nervous. It's his first time doing the treatment, and he's saying all this stuff. And there's this great quote, and I mean, not that you should aspire to be like Walter White or anything, but he did have a really good quote. He said to the guy, "To hell with your cancer. I've been living with cancer for the better part of a year. Right from the start, it's a death sentence. That's what they keep telling me. Well, guess what? Every life comes with a death sentence. So every few months, I come in here for my regular scan, knowing full well that one of these times, hell, maybe even today, I'm going to hear some bad news. But until then, who's in charge? Me. That's how I live my life." And before I even knew I was going to do this episode, I like paused that and like went back and listened to it again. Cause it's like, it seems so obvious, but sometimes it does kind of help to think about it. Everyone's born with a death sentence. Like, you're eventually going to die. So you got to make the most of it while you're here. So you can look at it that way. I think sometimes you say most people don't want to talk about death. There are exceptions to that. Mm-hmm. For example, if, you know, there are ways to deal with it. So if you're a Christian, you know, death is not the end. So in other religions too. So 1 Corinthians 15, 55 through 57, "Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So, you know, if you believe that you're going to die, you're going to go to heaven, that helps. Another thing, but I mean, even Christians are scared to death because you get this, you know, you're going to go to a better place, but it's still the fear of the unknown. The
journey there, the final road might be a little bit bumpy on the end.
Yeah, and it's also to the fear of the unknown. Sometimes people will be more comforted just thinking nothing's going to happen, but the other way, and to get to today's episode, really, and we took a long while to get here, but it all plays into, why do we have so many terms for death that are just not the word dead or dying or death? And another way we handle it is with humor. So a lot of the euphemisms and expressions we hear really come because we're trying to make light of something to be able to handle it better. So a bunch of these terms, for example, "shuffle off this mortal coil" from Shakespeare. We've got "pushing up daisies," "join the choir," "invisible." And then a bunch of these are in the sketch. And Steve, you've seen the Dead Parrot sketch.
Yes, I have.
So you're more of a Monty Python guy, I think, historically, than I am. And that may be just, you know, a couple of years. Like, I just kind of missed that, even though we're pretty close in age. But I went and watched the Dead Parrot sketch for the first time, and it was very, very funny, especially. So basically, I'm going to play a clip of it, but the sketch is it's a Monty Python sketch where John Cleese's character returns a parrot he bought to the shopkeeper, who's played by Michael Palin. And the shopkeeper is trying to convince him that the parrot isn't dead. He says things like he's just stunned or whatever. And then John Cleese keeps going through a bunch of euphemisms for death, which culminates in Cleese saying, "This is a late parrot. This is an ex-parrot," which I find hilarious.
The parrot sketch is hilarious. It's up there with the cheese shop as probably one of my top 2 Monty Python bits.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about the cheese shop one, but I remember you or Chris, or probably both of you at some point, playing that. Did you have a cassette tape with that on it?
Probably.
I think so.
I would use that on mixtapes I would make to kind of break up songs. I would throw a Monty Python skit in there every now and then.
I remember the cheese one. Well, anyway, I want to play a little bit of this Dead Parrot sketch because it's hilarious, but also it really gets to the heart of the point that I'm trying to make here. So here it is.
"This parrot is no more. It has ceased to be. It's expired and gone to meet its peacemaker. This is a late parrot. It's a stiff. Bereft of life, it rests in peace. If you hadn't nailed it to the perch, it would be pushing up the daisies. It's run down the curtain and joined the choir invisible. This is an ex-parrot.
Well, I better replace it then.
Really, I think that sketch is more about just bad customer service, but I do think it gives you an example of how we go around and around not wanting to use the words death or dead. So the first idiom that I want to talk about is kick the bucket. Now, I will say, you may, if you're a savvy listener and you've been here from the beginning, I think it's episode 13. We talked about this one a little bit. I re-listened to it today. And Steve, you want to guess how much time we spent on this idiom?
I barely remember that episode because I was also having an allergic reaction the entire time we recorded that.
Yes,
too.
you were.
I would say 10 minutes, if that.
Yeah, no, it was 5.5 minutes.
Okay.
And at least 90 seconds to 2 minutes of that, we were talking about Short Circuit 2. So it's definitely worth doing again. Plus the fact that I didn't do this one justice the first time. So my main source for this is going to be for Kick the Bucket is Worldwide Words, which I feel like we haven't used as much lately.
We haven't. We've I think we've expanded our horizons, but we never want to look past the joy and material we've received from Worldwide Words and also Phrase Finder. They are the foundation, I would say, of our research.
Absolutely. We try to mix it up too, because there are other, I don't know if I should say this, but I will. No, there are other podcasts that do origins of words and phrases. Right. And every once in a while I'll check one out.
But do any other podcasts have Barry Popick as a close and personal friend?
No, not at all.
I would say no.
And I'm going to say why we're better too. Although I do like some of them also, but the one I listened to today just verbatim read the Phrase Finder origin. Right. Didn't give it any credit. I knew it because I'd also had researched it, but I think you and I try to like mix it up a little bit with the research and get, but anyway, not to listen, I shouldn't even talk bad about it. And I notice I'm not saying the name of the podcast because I mean, we take everything from Phrase Finder, Worldwide Words, Urban Dictionary, but we always call it out.
And also Barry Popick.
And Barry Popick, of course. And thank you. And like you said, we've actually had him on. He's a friend of the show. So Kick the Bucket, the earliest undisputed appearance of Kick the Bucket was in a serial story in a British magazine called London Magazine. The hero of the story was a sailor, and he has just recovered from a serious illness. And here's how it goes in the story. My old messmate, Tom Bowline, met me at the gangway, and with a salute as hearty as honest, damned his eyes, but he was glad I had not kicked the bucket, while another swore roundly that I had turned well to windward and left death and the devil to leeward, and a third more vociferously exclaimed, I was born to dance upon nothing. So, and that comes from a story called The History of Edward and Maria in 1775, and that was in the London Magazine. By the way, to dance upon nothing means to die by hanging, if you think about the visual there.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time you see it, Kick the Bucket. And then 5 years later, also in London Magazine, a writer pretty much confirmed this meaning. And the article he writes is called The Observations on the Errors and Corruptions That Have Crept into the English Language. So he sounds fun. And here's what had happened. There was a letter which a friend had received, and he passed it on to the gentleman from London Magazine. In that letter, there's a sentence that says, quote, as to your inquiries about old Wentworth, poor man, he died extremely rich. His disease stuck so close to him that it has obliged him to kick the bucket. So then the writer of the article, whose name is not in here, it said, I should have been at a loss also to have known the significance of kicking the bucket, but am told it is an expression used to inform us of a person's death. Although I should no sooner apprehend it to be so than if I were told he had let fall his watch or rapped at my door. So he's saying there, the point there is that the author in 1780 had no idea why kick the bucket would signify death. So unfortunately, nobody can say for sure exactly why kick the bucket became a euphemism for death, but we do have a couple theories here, and then I have my favorite, and we'll see what
All
you
right.
think as well. So the first theory is that kicking the bucket is a way to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to our female Burrow.
Is that how she died? Was a
yeah.
bucket involved?
You know what? I will tell you how she died.
Okay.
I won't tell you. Well, I'll just tell the story. I've alluded to it so much. The female Burrow, because that's really going to be the star of this podcast. We should pour some out for her. So basically, the story is that, not the story, but what was observed was that the Burrow unfortunately gave birth to a stillborn baby Burrow.
Oh, gosh.
I told you.
Yeah.
And afterwards was upset because animals do have emotions and get sad and happy and stuff. Just walked into a lake and just
Wow.
ended it. So in the Psychology Today article, they were like, yeah, that's suicide. I mean, I don't know what else you would, maybe there's some sort of weird, brain issue that happened, but I mean, the thing
like
walked into
to
the water, didn't use a bucket. So the way that you would commit suicide this way would be to stand on the bucket, already have the noose around your neck, kick the bucket away.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a report of a man in Bath County, England, named John Mansfield, who killed himself this way. And in 1869, John Farmer and William Henley wrote a book called Slang and Its Analogues, which we've referred to a couple times. And they said this is a possible origin of kick the bucket. And that's the one, by the way, if you're I've started to feel like, Steve, we've debunked so much and we don't like folk etymology.
Nope.
But I'm almost to the point where if there are 3 possible origins and we don't know what the correct one is, even though I'm going to say which one I think is correct, like for whatever that's worth, I still think if you're at the bar, you should give the most interesting one because let's be honest, that's going to be more fun. So if you're going to give the one at the bar, this is a pretty good one. So the second theory appeared in something called Notes and Queries, which is an Oxford published academic journal about language. And this is in 1947. So a good, 70, 80 years after the last theory comes up. They suggested that kick the bucket had to do with a reference to an old custom of the Catholic Church, who, again, we used to talk about a lot, but we don't as much anymore. I kept trying to bring it into the assassin episode. But
yeah, you were pretty bent on bringing the Catholic Church into that. But I want to remind everyone also that the Catholic Church is responsible for my personal favorite idiom, loaded for bear.
Oh, yeah. That's right. So the theory that the kick the bucket came from the Catholic Church was after someone had died, the body would be laid out and a cross and 2 candles were placed near it. And then there would be a holy water bucket that was brought from the church and put at the feet of the corpse. So when friends came to pray for the deceased before leaving the room, they would sprinkle the body with the holy water. So they were so used to the bucket of holy water being associated with the feet of a deceased person that, as it says here in Notes and Queries, it's easy to see how the saying came about. That's what they said. I'm just going to come out and say, that one doesn't work for me. And it's really surprising that Notes and Queries, which is actually a very sort of distinguished academic journal, would even suggest that. It just feels
too much work for it. Like some of these folk etymologies are too easy. Like they set up things too much. This one seems just a little bit too complicated to get something we all kind of seem to know when we hear it.
Yeah. And going back to so if you look at the first 2 theories, you got the first one, which is about suicide and standing on a bucket. And it's just, kick the bucket doesn't mean you committed suicide. It means you died. Right. So it seems like a stretch, and they have one example of a guy doing it. It just doesn't. And then this one, like you said, it's too much of a stretch. I don't see anybody sprinkling holy water on a loved one and walking out and being like, hey, they kicked the bucket. It's like, no. So this is the one I like the best. The third one, it's also in that same book by Farmer and Henley, Slang and Its Analogues. And this one was also suggested as the origin in the Oxford English Dictionary in 1888. And so here's what it says. When a butcher slings up a sheep or pig after killing, he fastens to the hocks of the animal what is technically known in the trade as a gambal, or Gambal, a piece of wood curved somewhat like a horse's leg. It's also known in Norfolk as a bucket. So bucket, I may add, is not only well known in Norfolk in this sense and commonly used, but with some of our folk is the only word known for the article in question. So to quote, kick the bucket then is the sign of the animals being dead, and the origin of the phrase may probably, if not indisputably, be referred to this source. So I'm taking that from the OED from 1888.
So it's OED. So that's pretty good.
Now, this is the part that I whiffed on completely the first time I did this, because you said, okay, this piece of wood. So let's just step back from the quote for a second and picture this. So you've slit the neck of a animal and you've hung it up in your barn or whatever. You hang it on something. There's a curved piece of wood that you use to strap the legs in.
Right.
As the thing is dying, it's kicking this piece of wood.
Okay.
Now, but then where does bucket come in? And so what this guy's saying and what the OED was saying was that in this region of England, some county in England, they referred to that piece of wood, which is actually called a gamble, as a bucket. And I think you actually asked last time, like, well, okay, what is the stretch from gamble to bucket? And the part that I missed is the OED's editors mention that the word might not refer to our modern bucket, as I said before, but to the old French bouguette for a balance or a trebuchet, the medieval siege weapon used for hurling missiles at the enemy. So there is an old French word, bouquet, which is the same sort of piece of wood as they would use. Right. So that's where they're saying. Now, on Worldwide Words, once again, like Michael Quinion just writes this stuff so well. He's sort of like, he lists all these three and then he goes, so maybe that's it and maybe it's not. Right. So we don't really know. I guess if I had to pick one of these three, it would have to do. And what Michael Quinion too said was, what are the odds that this euphemism that was used in this county, in this rural area, would somehow make it to be a phrase that we use today? I mean, look, it came from somewhere. And even if you ask somebody, hey, what do you think kick the bucket means? Usually they'll say something without even ever having read the OED in 1888. They will think of an animal kicking a bucket. So there is some sort of thing there. And I think that's probably it.
I think you're right. I could see almost a combination of 3 in 1. That it starts with an animal kicking the bucket, and then the folk etymology maybe helps spread the idea. Yes. Because it's a really simple way. It's almost too easy to kind of translate it that someone would use a bucket and to kick it to take their own life. I could see that kind of being like a little way to like transport that theory around and keep it alive.
Yeah, I can see that as well. So before we move on to new slang, I wanted to bring up another term that's somewhat related to this in that it has the word bucket, and that is bucket list.
Bucket list.
So when I think about bucket list, I think about the movie from 2007 with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson. I've never seen it. Maybe when I turn 75, I'll watch it. Yeah. But have you seen the movie?
I haven't. I'm aware of it, but I think that's definitely aimed at an older demographic, even though they're both tremendous actors. No.
They're great. And it just didn't really appeal to me at the time. But bucket list is a term that was around, didn't originate with that movie as I thought maybe it did. There is an article by Ben Zimmer in the Wall Street Journal where he talks about the origin, and we won't get too far into it, but bucket list was something that was around in the early 2000s. It was actually used some by coders. It was used in business. You would say, hey, let's put all these ideas in one bucket. And, like maybe you're brainstorming, you use the term bucket to, so we're going to make a list out of that bucket. It was also, I think, used in 2004 where having to do with things you do before you die as well. It was in a book called Unfair and Unbalanced by Patrick Carlisle, and it includes the quote, "So anyway, a great man in his querulous twilight years who doesn't want to go gently into that blacky black night, he wants to cut loose, dance on the razor's edge, pry the lid off his bucket list." Anyway, so it was used that way. So that all brings me to this, Steve, the big question.
Sure.
Before you kick the bucket, you have anything on your bucket list?
I do. I have 3 things, and I'll actually share them. So
Please.
1, make it to Paris, which I think was something I listed the last time that we discussed this several years ago.
Yeah.
And then ever since I've done that, I've jinxed it, brought upon unexpected situations and pandemics and things of that nature that have prevented me from doing it. But I think that's fairly reasonable to do.
Mm-hmm.
To write and publish a book.
Okay.
Something that's on the list. And I didn't really realize it was on my bucket list. To my wife, I was discussing something I'd been working on. She goes, "Oh, yeah, that's really on your bucket list, isn't it?"
Mm-hmm.
And finally, and this is actually true, I want to hunt and kill a bear.
Really?
And I think that is really good from a bucket list standpoint, because once I've defeated a bear, I think I've done everything in my life. And if I don't defeat the bear, if I get mauled and eaten by a bear, frankly, it's pretty fitting that
it would be poetic justice.
It would be. It would be
all this you talked about.
It would be
Timothy
a fitting end to my life.
Oh, I love that. Good. Well, it just so happens that I only have one thing on my bucket list, and it's to dress up as a bear and get hunted in the woods by Steve.
I like that.
So
I'd watch that movie.
That's how I want to go out. Speaking of going out, that's it for the bucket list. Steve, you've got They Walk Among Us, right?
I sure do.
Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
There's a secret society of the 5 wealthiest people in the world known as the Pentaveret.
We know differently, and here's David Stern with the announcement.
Pick, select Patrick Ewing.
Who run everything in the world.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The Queen, the Vatican, the Gettys, the Rothschilds, and Colonel Sanders before he went tits up.
They walk among us.
So for this week's They Walk Among Us, our conspiracy theory segment. Normally when we do conspiracy theories, I don't feel personally affected by them. I don't think there's many conspiracy theories I really believe in. And if I do, they're obviously correct conspiracy theories. Because as we learned from Professor Joe Usinski, conspiracy theorists generally aren't people who are kooks living in their basement. They're you and I. They're people around us. Basically everyone except you and I would probably be the best way to say it. However, I found one that it challenged me, not in that I believe it, but that it offended me. And the conspiracy theory for this week is Australia does not exist.
Wow.
So to preface, one of the things I love about our show is we try to be very positive about different peoples throughout the world. I think we're one of the few podcasts that when we discuss France, we only have good things to say. I think we're on record in several episodes of being fans of the Dutch.
Yeah.
And being pro-Dutch, even though MC Search told us some stuff about the Dutch that we don't necessarily support. And again, nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
But Australia is one of our favorite countries.
Yeah.
I
Well,
would say.
and not only is it one of our favorite countries, you've gone on record as saying that's your getaway plan.
That's my
If you ever
getaway.
need to go somewhere. So I can see why you would be offended that
Yeah.
there's a conspiracy theory that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. On top of the fact that we have good supporters and friends like Alan, who likes to email us periodically to compliment us on how well we pronounce the words that we address on this show. On Instagram, we had a listener, Grace, who reached out to us and shared some good information. So Australia...
She's from Australia, too.
She's from Australia.
Wow.
So this kind of bothers me. And we're big fans of Australia. Adelaide. Now, to clarify, we talked about this on a previous episode. When I say getaway, like this isn't like I've killed someone I need to hide.
Right.
I've decided, the United States, I've used up all my opportunities
Right.
here.
You've killed a guy in a bear outfit.
Maybe. That could be that would be a good reason, I think. That would be a positive
Yeah.
reason. Adelaide, Australia would be the place. If I needed to leave the U.S., that's where I would go.
Right.
Not to stereotype. I love the movie Crocodile Dundee. I watch it frequently. I actually just bought it the other night. It was on sale for
Really?
like $5.
Oh, wow.
It's a solid flick. You should
Haven't
watch
seen
it
it in so long.
It's
Definitely
pretty
saw
good.
it. Mhm.
The I have a that's not a knife.
Yeah, that's a classic. You're out eating with a steak with somebody, and you gotta do that. That's
Yeah.
not a knife.
So again, I take this very personal. So to start out, we're going to go to BuzzFeed.com. So it's not really good. In their article, everything you need to know about the conspiracy theory that Australia does not exist. And in this article, they discuss a theory that was shared in a Facebook status. So it's even better. That almost 20,000 people had shared. And
fact check.
Yeah, fact check. Where are you, Mark Zuckerberg, right now? The writer, whose name I will not give, offers multiple theories to how Australia is, quote, one of the biggest hoaxes ever created. Continuing, Australia does not exist, it reads. All the things you call proof are actually well-fabricated lies and documents made by the leading governments of the world. Your Australian friends, they're all actors and computer-generated personas, part of the plot to trick the world. So to continue, I'm going to go to an article from hit.com, the Australian version of that website. This woman is convinced that Australia doesn't even exist, and she has evidence.
Oh, wow.
So
this will be good.
More detail that she's provided. Mm-hmm. If you ever have been to Australia, you're terribly wrong. The plane pilots are all in on this and have in all actuality only flown you to islands close nearby, or in some cases parts of South America, where they've cleared space and hired actors to act out as real Australians. She continues. Make it known that this has all been a cover-up. All these swear words and actions based on alcoholism, MDMA, and bad decisions are always to distract you from the ugly truth. This is one of the greatest genocides in history.
Whoa.
162,000 people were said to be transported to this imaginary land during a mere 80 years, and they are all long dead by now. They never reached that promised land.
Okay, so hold up. This took a turn. So they're saying, or she's saying,
yes,
that there's no Australia, and that they take people and kill them and say they're going to Australia? Like, is that what she's saying? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well,
a genocide of whom?
Actually, what she's saying is, so what she's saying the cover-up is that when Australia was founded as a British colony,
right,
where prisoners were sent,
the
prisoners were never sent there.
I see.
They were actually loaded into ships and drowned. So I think you and I agree that Australia does exist. We're fans of Australia. We've interacted with people there.
I mean,
I've researched it heavily. Not in a Jenny McCarthy, I'm going to make my own medical decisions way.
That's Dr. Oh, wait. No, it's not.
No, it's not. But one of the things, speaking of a doctor, I remember Professor Joe Usinski, who inspired this segment. When we spoke to him, he said, all these conspiracy theories that you hear, they've all been out there before in one form or another.
Right.
There's really no new conspiracy theories.
Yep.
So reading from an article about the Australian conspiracy theory from The Guardian, the author discusses another conspiracy theory that's related, the conspiracy theory that Finland does not exist.
Oh, okay.
So from The Guardian, high on the list is Finland, the country some believe lies between Russia and Sweden, that allegedly fought a valiant rearguard action against the Soviet invasion in the run-up to the Second World War. This theory was also born on Reddit, which I'll say you definitely know is good, in 2015. Finland was merely a fictional creation designed to create fishing quotas to aid the export of sushi to Japan from Russia.
I mean, that seems like a long way to go to cover up some fishing export.
It sounds like it, but let me propose this to you.
Okay.
We know that Australia is real. We've researched it.
Right.
We've watched movies. We've interacted with people from there.
Wait a minute.
If I presented a map to you, you could find Australia.
Yes.
If I presented a map to you right now, do you think you could find Finland?
Probably not. I'd probably I'd look at like Sweden or, I know what that peninsula looks like with Denmark and Sweden, right? But hold on. Finland. It's right there in the title. Fish have fins.
It could
be the fish cover up. I'm saying.
So let's say
I'm starting to think that there might be something to this.
Yeah. So let me give you a little bit more information. And as you'll notice, the quality of our resources continue to go down.
You had The Guardian, and then you jumped from that to Reddit.
Yeah, and now we're going to go to Vice.com.
Okay.
And an article entitled, "This Dude Accidentally Convinced the Internet That Finland Doesn't Exist." So go back to our friend who was on Reddit. The article says Jack took his teachings to the only place he could ever truly be loved, which is Reddit. So here's some of his facts on why Finland doesn't exist. Well, firstly, they say the actual place of Finland is just eastern Sweden. Helsinki is in eastern Sweden, and when people fly there, it's not like they would notice. World maps are altered as a UN conspiracy to keep people believing in Finland. And the idea that an entire country is made up seems so bizarre that no one would ever believe it. Make it easy to do.
So crazy it just might be true type of thing.
Finland's main company, Nokia, is apparently owned by the Japanese, and they're the main player in this.
Oh, no.
Now,
I knew Nokia had something to do with this.
Now, as for the why people would want to invent Finland as a country, that's a bit more in depth, and there's a few reasons as to why Sweden and Russia would go along with it, but it's mostly to do with Japanese fishing rights.
Wow.
So again, I'm fairly confident that Australia exists. We have our great listeners there, and we appreciate you. Do we have listeners in Finland? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Is Finland real? I'm not sure either. I can't think of anything. I think of the greatest Finn actors, movies, music.
It's a good point. I was sitting here thinking like I was like going to say my dad's been to Finland but no, he's been to Denmark.
Yeah.
He's been to Denmark. I looked it up real quick on a map while we were talking. And if it is real, if Finland is real, it's huge. I never realized how huge it was. Like you could fit, Spain, Portugal, and France and some of Germany all into Finland. Yeah. But yet, like you said, where's all the famous Finnish composers and stuff? I mean, maybe they're out there.
Where's their Crocodile Dundee?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
So to conclude, the conspiracy theory that Australia does not exist is obviously horse crap. Australia exists. But Finland, we'll see.
They walk among us.
All right, so for the next euphemism for death, we're going to go with by the farm.
By the farm.
Yeah, so is that one I don't know that I ever have used it, but you've heard it, right?
I think I actually have.
Okay.
I think I've used the derivative bought the farm.
Bought the farm.
And it's something that, since you brought this up, I actually feel like I do say that every now and then.
Yeah.
And it's a good way, again, with all euphemisms, it keeps you from acknowledging the reality and gravity of what you're discussing, and keeps you at arm's length a little bit. And it's one that I don't know if you would give a non-native English speaker this idiom and it would make sense.
Right.
But it does to me. Like if someone said, oh, so-and-so bought the farm, I wouldn't think that they'd gotten into agriculture. I would think that they had passed away.
And it's a I don't know how else to put this. It's a good one. There's something about it that sounds, it just works. Oh yeah, he bought the farm. It just, and you almost don't care where it came from. Kind of like, I shouldn't say that because why are you listening to this program? Yeah. But anyway, hopefully you do care. So this one, you're right about the English speaking thing. This is not one that came from like Germany, like throw out the baby with the bathwater or one of those. This phrase, to buy the farm or so-and-so bought the farm, there is no doubt that it came from the U.S. Air Force. So it was slang for a fatal crash. Now, we're going to talk about why. Now, that comes from various sources, but Professor Jonathan Leiter has compiled in the Random House Historical Dictionary of American Slang that bought the farm came from the Air Force. And by the way, my source here again is going to be Worldwide Words. So why would this be something that they would call a fatal crash in the Air Force? So bought the farm seems to be related to several older British slangs like buy it or buy one. And you'd say it like, oh, he's bought one. And these are known to be British fighter pilot phrases that were used as slang from World War I, somebody being wounded or killed, particularly if they were shot down in combat. And the way they meant it was ironic. So in other words, you're saying you bought something, but it was something you clearly wouldn't want to buy. Right. So it's almost like sarcastic. Oh, he bought it. So the longer version of the phrase is to buy a packet. And again, it was meant ironically because in the British Army, you would say to stop a packet, the packet is a bullet. So it just meant to be shot. So if you say you bought a packet, it meant you were shot, wounded, or killed.
Right.
So this goes back to the British Air Force. So it kind of makes sense that it would show up in the United States Air Force. There were other forms used in the early 50s. So this one really didn't start till the early 50s in the way that we use it now. But they would say things like buy the plot or buy the lot. And that was referencing grave plots. So if you were to buy the plot, it clearly meant you were dead. Yeah. So here's a story about the origin of buy the farm that was in American Speech in 1955. And here's what it says. It says, jet pilots say that when a jet crashes on a farm, the farmer usually sues the government for damages done to his farm by the crash. and the amount demanded is always more than enough to pay off the mortgage and buy the farm outright. Since this type of crash is nearly always fatal to the pilot pays for the farm with his life. So there's pilot crashes, the farmer sues, it pays off the farm.
Yeah.
The pilot bought the farm. Well, as Michael Quinion says, I do like the way he put this in his article. He said, the lifting of my back hairs tells me this is folk etymology.
I like that Michael Quinion actually does have like a spidey sense for folk etymology. He's done enough of this, and I would agree with him. It almost lines up. Even though it's one I could see before we did this show, I would probably agree with. It seems
absolutely,
it very plausible.
Well, I would like to say that I think that you and I are we're not anywhere near, obviously, Michael Quinion, but we're starting to develop a little bit of that spidey sense. I know, like one of my back hairs kind of lifted up when I read that. So it could be that, but one of the problems with it being that, as Michael Quinion notes, is that Professor Leiter, who wrote about this in the Cambridge thing, also says people remember the saying of buy the farm in the U.S. Air Force during the time of the Korean War a few years earlier. So if that's true, the compensation idea could not apply. I guess that, I don't know why he says that, but I guess well, I guess if you crashed in Korea, they weren't going to get paid. Their farm's not going to get paid off. None of this really makes sense when you start looking at it more closely. So the broad consensus is that the term is based on sort of a black humor that's very common amongst people in dangerous professions, right? A way of sort of, if you listen to like people in the military, especially pilots and things like that, they have to almost make light of death.
Yep.
Sort of going into what we talked about earlier. So, there's a woman named Ann Moore, and she was trying to explain this, and she put it this way. She said, my Air Force officer husband told me the origin, as generally accepted in the Air Force. When a pilot thought about retirement, he would say, I'm going to buy a nice little farm and settle down. So when a fatal crash occurred, his surviving buddies would say he had bought the farm. He had permanently, right? So it's kind of turning the idea of, hey, I'm going to retire and buy a farm. It's like, guess he bought the farm.
Yeah.
That rings way more true to me. And then someone named Larry Krakauer suggested another source. He said there's a U.S. war movie, which it doesn't list here. There's a character from the heart. And I think the point is, and I was reading this in some other sources too, a trope. You were talking about tropes in a previous episode. There is a trope in war movies where, soldiers talk about, hey, when this war is over, I'm going to go back home, buy a small farm and settle down. Then later in the story, the soldier is killed, and one of the friends says, well, I guess Joe's bought his farm now, which reminds me of one of the, I'll do a little aside here. I remember, have you ever seen the movie The Roaring Twenties?
I have not.
It is maybe my favorite old movie of all time. It's like right up there with, I'm a big Humphrey Bogart fan.
Yes.
So this is Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney.
Okay.
James Cagney's really the star. But I mean, for me, he steals every scene he's in. He's phenomenal. Like, I want to go watch this when I'm done. There's a scene where he's, in the trenches, and I guess it would be in World War I. And he's there with this other soldier, and he's such a hard ass, Bogey is. And he's, machine gunning people that are trying to, like, get across the field. And the other guy that's with him is having these moral qualms, and he's like, that kid was only 17. He's like, he won't see 18. And it's so dumb. But I actually remember watching this in college with our friend Adam, and we both paused it and we kept rewinding it and laughing because it was just so dark of humor. Just like, he won't see 18. Like, I don't give a, he didn't care at all. So anyway, that has nothing to do with Bought the Farm, but it just reminds me of the dark humor that you'd have to have in this scenario. The last, and so I actually think that is probably, what do you think? Does that kind of ring more true to you?
I think so. I think the more that you get in with people in the military or who have high risk jobs, that, death is a constant. You can't, in the same way that we have to make euphemisms knowing that eventually we're going to die, when you're faced with it daily, you have to use that humor to keep your distance from it and not acknowledge your own mortality, which is, you're very much aware of as you're risking it every day.
Yeah. For sure. And So to give you the last potential one, and frankly, I think it might be a blend of all of these, if not these final two. Maybe not the thing about the farmer suing, but the dark humor. Plus, here's the last one. The Michael Quinion kind of says that he's seen these theories around the internet, so that tells you, how reliable it is. But still, there is a gentleman named Jack Burton, not that Jack Burton, who said, "I understand that this term dates back at least to World War II. Each member of the U.S. Armed Services was issued a life insurance policy in the amount of $10,000, which was a great deal of money in those days. Many of the troops were unmarried youngsters who named their parents as beneficiaries. Many of the parents were still living on a farm in those days, and most farms were mortgaged. If a youngster were killed, the $10,000 would be used to pay off the parents' mortgage." So, that you talk about back hair standing up. I mean, just when you read that, when I was reading that, it sounded like horror guy, didn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds that thing where somebody's trying to sort of give you this ironclad thing. My guess is it's dark humor, and unfortunately, both with this one and Kick the Bucket, we can't say exactly what it is.
Right.
With a lot of these, we have that issue. I do think there's something having to do with the fact of early retirement because you died, and some form of money going to either the farmland that you landed on or to your parents back home who can now buy the farm.
Yeah.
It works. Even if that didn't happen all the time, you can see it being something one pilot would say to the other guy, "Oh, yeah, you heard about Chip. Chip bought the farm."
Yep.
Oh, so and it kind of reminds me too of Tom Wolfe and
From The Right Stuff.
Right Stuff. Yes. Reminds me of kind of the way those guys would interact there. So in summary, in this episode, maybe we should spend some time every once in a while contemplating the fact that we are going to die.
Yeah.
You can use the word dead or death, but don't be afraid to use a euphemism. There's a bunch of them. So as Siggy from What About Bob said, we're all going to die. And as Walter White said, we're all born with a death sentence. But we can laugh about it a little bit too and try to make light of it.
And always remember, at least you don't have it as bad as a burrow.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for listening to Origin of Speaksies. If you enjoyed the show and want to support us, become a Speaksies supporter. As a Speaksies supporter, you receive great benefits, including extra podcasts like Personal Records and True Facts with Robert Banquette, but also exclusive video content with our guest stars. Your cost, whatever you want to pay. Any contribution unlocks all content and benefits. Become a Speaksies supporter today by going to patreon.com/Speaksies. That's patreon.com/Speaksies.
All right, Bob's your uncle.
Watch out for bears, and kale is from the devil.
You're down, you're down, you're down, you're down and out of this world.
Speaksies.